Hello, everyone. Welcome to the fourth session of the series, Teaching Online. It's about teaching, not technology. My name is José Manuel Villafuerte, and I will be with you today as a moderator, along with your host, Regional English Language Officer, Dr. Ruth Petzold. We will try to answer your questions and respond to your comments during the session. Today, our host, Ruth Petzold, will be talking with our presenter, Heather Gaddis, and we hope that you will find the session enlightening and useful. Let's get started.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back. We're delighted to have you join us for this series, created with Mexico in mind, but also we hope helpful for those of you joining us from other countries. It was created to help us now during this pandemic, but also in the future because we hope it helps you to discover that you actually like teaching online. I want to remind you that in order to receive news about the upcoming webinar sessions, tips and tools for English language teaching, please like the Relo Mexico Facebook page. So today is the third session of the series Teaching Online. It's about teaching, not technology. As you can see on our calendar, over the remaining 5 weeks, we'll be talking about creating classroom activities in learning management systems. That's today's topic. Using cell phones to teach in low tech or low connectivity environments. Teaching students of different age groups virtually, learning how to do classroom management, differentiated instruction, evaluation and assessment, all in an online environment. We're sure you'll be hearing lots of practical ideas from our experienced panelists. So, of the remaining topics, what are you most eager to hear about? Please let us know in the comments. And as we've said in earlier sessions, we want to make sure you know what to expect each time. Our sessions are each Monday and Thursday. They last about 60 minutes. Our aim in each of these sessions is to show you which tools can help you teach the way you want to make you as comfortable in this new virtual classroom as you were in your physical classroom. We'll have one expert doing the presenting, the primary presenting, and sometimes there'll be the support of a second panelist. And I, as host, will make sure that they hear as many of your questions as possible. And so do please share them in the comments section. And of course, we don't mind if you use the emojis too. So today's session, it's on learning management systems. And let's start with a quick warm-up. Have you used a learning management system such as Google Classroom, either as a teacher or as a learner? How did you feel, especially at first? Comfortable, confused, excited? Go ahead and share that if you want in the comments. We hope that by the end of today's session, everyone will feel more comfortable and confident when using a learning management system. So in this session, we'll be learning about the importance of the actual design of the system, seeing how to set up an online course, identifying the common tools and assignment types available in learning management systems, and then understanding the role of these systems in flipped learning. And so now We're pleased to introduce, or if you were with us before, to reintroduce our presenter today, Heather Gaddis. Heather finished her master's in applied linguistics with a concentration in TESOL in 2008 at Old Dominion University and started her teaching career in Tidewater Community College and Old Dominion University's intensive English program. In August 2009, she moved to Oaxaca and taught at the Universidad Tecnológica de Mixteca. From there, she moved to Izmir, Turkey, and started to gain experience integrating technology into ELT. Heather went on to complete a master's in educational technology online with Boise State University in Idaho. She returned to Mexico in 2011 and began working as an academic coordinator at a K-12 bilingual school in Querétaro. In 2018, she completed the diploma in teaching English to speakers of other languages through Cambridge English Assessment. Currently, Heather is spending her time working on a variety of projects and courses, including coordinating a teacher training course for pre-service teachers, delivering training courses for in-service teachers in Querétaro and the surrounding area, writing ELT materials, and working as an examiner for international proficiency exams. Whew, you're a busy woman, Heather. So over now to you.
Yes, thank you, Ruth. So as Ruth just mentioned, today we will be talking about learning management systems, such as Moodle, Google Classroom, Schoology, Blackboard, Edmodo, among others. So a learning management system is where your online course will live and be accessed by your students. It's where you will post assignments and resources for your students, and where you will communicate with them about their progress. In session 1, we spoke briefly about asynchronous versus synchronous learning. If your class is asynchronous, meaning it does not have live Zoom sessions or Google Meets, your learning management system may be the only, or at least the main way for you to interact with students and for your students to interact with each other. If you do have synchronous learning or live sessions, your learning management system will provide a home base for students to know what they need to do before or after live sessions. So today we will see examples from 2 learning management systems, Moodle and Google Classroom, with much of the session being focused on Google Classroom. So the first big topic we will dive into is online course design. Online course design is related with how we set up our classroom to make sure that our students have a positive learning experience. Online learning can feel isolating for students, and it will never be everyone's favorite way of learning. So it is important that we set up our online class so it is easy for students to navigate and to learn. So now we will talk about 2 main topics, design principles and communication with your students. So the first topic we're going to look at is Carp. These are design principles that can be applied to any digital resources, such as PowerPoint presentations. I want you to think about a presentation you attended or a website you have used, where the design or the way the information was organized was distracting. How did you feel? Frustrated, confused? Did you stop paying attention to the presentation or leave the website? Design is more than making things look pretty. Design, in this case, the design of an online course, is about making sure the focus is on the information your students need and not on finding the information. So we're going to talk briefly about these 4 design principles. CARP stands for contrast, alignment, repetition, and proximity. So before I explain a bit more, let's see what these principles refer to. Here we can see an example of bad design. We have a list of items, but they are all over the place. Imagine trying to make sense of this information. So the first principle is contrast. which refers to making sure that there is enough of a difference in the color that you use for your students to see things, and also that your titles and subtitles are bigger than other text, which helps your students to locate important information. The next principle is alignment, which means you use bullet points or lists to have things that are related all aligned up. Then there's repetition, which is the idea that you should use the same font, same size of letters, etc. for the same things, such as having the same size and font for titles, subtitles, and text throughout your online course and in all of your presentations and documents. Then there's proximity, which means you put information or ideas together that are related. For example, you put homework assignments together or class resources together in separate categories. So now we're going to see some examples of using these principles in communicating with students online. Okay. Here is an example of Moodle, which is a learning management system commonly used by universities and some high schools. I saw in the survey we did at the end of the first session that a few of you have used Moodle and others have used Schoology and Edmodo. While I will be focusing on Moodle and Google Classroom today, I did want to mention that the basic principles of setting up your online classroom and communicating with students through it are the same, no matter what platform you use. So back to the example. So here you can see one section of a Moodle class. In this case, it shows the online assignments for one period or parcial. The section includes due dates, assignments students have to hand in, as well as 2 other assignment types. So let's first take a look at the ideas of proximity and alignment. So you can see here that I've put all of the class assignments in one list, so they are together and they are aligned together. Now, if you think about repetition, I have used a standard naming system so that students know which assignments are classwork and which are homework. Another aspect of repetition is that each period or parcial, I have one section in Moodle that is organized in the exact same way. Consistency in terms of how your online classroom is organized and how you name assignments or write instructions will be very helpful to your students. Okay. So now we're going to talk about setting up an online course in Google Classroom. Here you can see some different parts of a Google Classroom course, such as Stream, Classwork, People, and Grades. Stream is where you can post messages and updates to students. Classwork is where you can also put assignments and resources you upload to Google Classroom, and they will appear here. People will show what students and teachers are enrolled in the class, and you can also use it as a quick way to send emails to individual students or groups of students. Grades is where all graded assignments will appear, and it will also show you a complete list of assignments, which ones are missing, which ones have been graded, and which ones are in the process but have not been turned in quite yet. Okay. In the Classwork tab, which is what you are seeing now in more detail here, you can create categories or topics for different types of resources or assignments. You can use the periods of your school year or types of assignments or resources, or even major projects in your class. Here, I have divided this class into class assignments, where the students will upload different tasks, and then also class resources, which is where I put class notes, such as presentations or handouts that I use in class, and links to the live Zoom session in case some students missed a class or they want to watch part of a class again. Using topics or labels to set up your Google Classroom is an example of proximity because you are putting related assignments and resources into lists. This will help students to find out what they are looking for faster because they won't have to look through such a long list of items. Okay. So now what you're looking at here is a post in the stream part of Google Classroom. Here is where you can post messages to students and provide some explanation for what is expected of them each week. This class that I'm showing you here meets every Monday and Wednesday via Zoom. And every Wednesday after class, their assignments for the next week are posted. It is important to stay consistent when you post because it helps students to get into a routine. Time management is a challenge for many students now that the routine has changed so much. So you can see that the assignments are divided into two lists. Those that students have to do before class on Monday and those that they have to do before class on Wednesday. This is an example of proximity. Each list is numbered and the instructions for each part use the same basic language. These are examples of repetition. You can also see that the list use the exact name of the resources. This is so that students can easily find any resource they need to use, and they don't have to guess which resource goes with each assignment or step. You should always provide a direct link or the exact name of the resource for students as well. One very important tip to keep in mind is that the more clicks a student has to do to get to an assignment, the less likely they will actually get to the assignment and do it. It's just like when you tell someone how to get to your house. If there are so many steps or turns to take, it is more likely they will get lost. You definitely do not want your students to get lost online. So we just saw a few examples of setting up classroom and communication in Moodle and Google Classroom. So now I just want to go through some recommended specifics when it comes to communication. The first is to be consistent in how you organize or format communication, such as using the same titles, subtitles, bullet points, and always including the direct link to resources. And also in how you use language, such as using a naming system for assignments and the same language for instructions. Keeping language simple and consistent is particularly important with students who are learning English as a second language. We want them to focus on the assignment, not on figuring out what we want them to do. Another important point is to include learning objectives or the purpose of activities. In the face-to-face classroom, we sometimes don't explain to students why they are doing a particular activity. And they don't always ask because, well, they're in class and they can't really go anywhere else, at least most of the time. With online learning, students can choose to do something else, and there are many distractors in their lives. So you need to ensure that students are aware of why they are doing a particular activity. Another example of best practice is giving students access to the assessment tool you will use to evaluate or grade their work. This is something we often do in a face-to-face class, simply by explaining to students how they will be graded. But we don't always give them the rubric or a checklist that we will use. A rubric is a tool that we can use to evaluate our students' performance. We will see an example of one in just a few minutes. In an online classroom, we need to give students access to the rubric or checklist so they know what is expected of them, and so they can use the tool to assess themselves. We won't have the same opportunity that we have in a face-to-face class to explain the key aspects of the assignment and to correct any misunderstandings. So we need to make sure that information is available to students when they start an assignment. Okay. So now I'm going to talk about a few common assignment types found in most online management systems. So we will talk about discussion forums, quizzes, and then presentations or documents such as essays or some other type of written text. Again, I will focus mostly on Google Classroom, but these assignment types are available on most, if not all, learning management systems. Okay. So here is how it looks when you create a new assignment in Google Classroom, which you will do in classwork. The first is a general assignment, such as turning in a document or a presentation. The second is a quiz assignment. And the next is a question, which in Google Classroom is what you will use to start a discussion forum. Then finally, there's an assignment type called material, which is a way to give students resources, but it will not allow them to turn anything into you. I use this type material to post class notes or extra resources for students. But you should keep in mind that it will not be possible for students to upload a worksheet or a text if you use this type of assignment. After material, you see reuse post. This is helpful when you have an assignment that you want to give to more than one class. You also see at the bottom topic, which you can use to organize your assignments and resources so that it is easier for students to find what they are looking for. So before we move on, which assignment types do you use the most with your students? Which one would you like to explore a bit more? Okay. So the first assignment type that we're going to talk about in more detail is a discussion forum. So before I show you an example of a discussion forum, I want to go over a few recommendations for this type of activity. The first is about deadlines. Sometimes discussion forums do not result in the level of interaction between students that we were expecting. And this happens for a couple reasons. The first is that some students log on early and post in the discussion forum. Those first few students who post do not have a lot of other students to respond to, and then they never come back to the discussion forum to respond to their classmates. If you give 2 deadlines for posting in the forum, one for the first post and then another deadline for responding to a classmate, you will get more interaction between students. Next, as a teacher, you can participate in the discussion forum, much like you would in a classroom discussion. You can add questions about students' posts to encourage them to continue to share. Finally, rubrics. So you might think it's not necessary to grade students' performance in a discussion, but using a simple rubric or a checklist will help set some guidelines or expectations for discussion forum participation. You can use the same rubric for all of your discussion forums or make small changes depending on what students are writing about. So again, we will see an example of a rubric in just a few slides. So here is an example of a discussion forum activity in Moodle. In this case, my instructions to the students were to pick 2 words from a class dictionary and then create a story. I wrote the first line of a story and then the students contributed to it in the order they logged on and completed the activity. So you can think of this as an online version of a chain story activity where you give students the first line of a story, they write 1 line, pass it to the next student who writes another line, and so on. This is a good activity to practice vocabulary and verb tenses. So just one note about the blue boxes you will see on some of my slides. I have put them there in order to hide the names of my students. So part of being a good digital citizen, and particularly when it comes to teaching online, is respecting your students' privacy. Okay. So here is an example of a discussion forum in Google Classroom. I gave students a few questions related to a topic and asked them to post their ideas by Monday and then respond to a classmate by Wednesday. So let's see how my students responded. You can see that the first student responded, and then I, Heather Gaddis, praised their participation and asked a question to get them to think a little bit more about the topic. Then a few other students participated, responding to both my question and the original post. You can also post a short video or a reading for students to respond to, as well as questions to help them really dig into the topic. Students can give their opinion on different aspects of the reading or the video. And then if you have synchronous or live sessions with your students, you could go into more detail about the topic. So what are some ways you could use a discussion forum with your students? Okay, so finally, we have arrived to the example of a rubric. So here it is. This is one that you can use to evaluate discussion forum participation. So as I mentioned a little bit earlier, a rubric is a tool that we can use to grade or evaluate students, particularly for assignments like essays, class participation, projects, and presentations, because it allows us to decide on the criteria, which you can see here, the criteria. So these are the important areas we want to focus on. And then we can decide what exactly we expect from our students when we decide the levels. So unsatisfactory, satisfactory, and excellent, which you can see here. So as you can see, this rubric is quite simple. I only have 3 criteria. So one focuses on how often students are presenting or participating, if their responses are actually relevant, and if they are well written and organized. So you can make this even simpler if you want by turning it into a checklist that students can use to evaluate themselves. For example, did I post on time? Did I respond to a classmate? Was my response on topic? Is my response easy to read? Okay, so again, students need to see this rubric before they participate in a discussion forum so they know exactly what is expected from them and how they will be evaluated. So taking the example of the rubric a little bit further, here is how you might create a rubric in Google Classroom. So I'm using the exact same rubric that I used in the previous slide. I'm using the first criteria, which was participation, which you can see here. So I have the title of this particular criterion. And then here I've put the points. So unsatisfactory, satisfactory, and then excellent. So in Google Classroom, you can decide to create a rubric that has points like this one, or you can just use one that has descriptions. It depends on how you're going to use this for grading. Okay. If you do decide to use it with points, that would be automatically logged in or put into the Google Classroom gradebook, which is also very helpful. Okay. So now we're going to talk about quizzes. So this is another common type of assignment in online classrooms. So a quiz or a standardized evaluation. So it might have a mixture of true/false questions, fill in the blanks, multiple choice questions, among other types of responses. So in the survey that we did at the end of the first session, a couple people mentioned they're looking for ways to evaluate or assess their students online. So we will go into that topic in more detail in a later webinar, but today I wanted to talk about how you can do this type of activity through a learning management system. So the first tip that I want to talk about is minimizing cheating. So when you set up a quiz or a similar assignment, be sure to check out the settings that will cut down on students sending each other answers. One common way is to shuffle or change the order of questions. Students will likely not realize, at least at first, that they are getting slightly different versions of the quiz. And if they do try to send their friends the answers will be incorrect. Another thing is to put time limits on assignments. So in Moodle, you can set a time limit that starts once the student opens the assignment. In Google Classroom, you can make the quiz unavailable to students after a certain time. One very beautiful thing about doing this type of activity through a learning management system is that the system can grade all or some of the quiz for you. So for any question that there's one or a limited number of answers, the system can do that for you. So this is related to another positive aspect of quizzes that you do through learning management systems, and that's access to feedback. You can choose if students have immediate access to feedback, such as when all of the quiz is graded by the system, or you can release grades after a certain amount of time or after everyone has taken the quiz. Deciding when to give access to feedback will also depend on the purpose of the quiz. You can have online quizzes be for evaluation or grading purposes, or you can also use them to let students review a particular topic. If you want to let students use a quiz to review, you can change the settings to allow them to do the same quiz over and over again, as well as see the answers with explanations. A final positive thing of doing quizzes in a learning management system is analysis of results. So we will see this in a couple slides, but most systems will do some analysis for you, such as what is the overall average, what is the range of grades, what are some particularly difficult questions. So this can be helpful as a teacher to see where you need to review content. Okay. So when you create a quiz assignment in Google Classroom, a Google form with some special settings will be created. So here's what a blank quiz or Google form looks like. So here in the upper right-hand corner, you can see this little wheel, and that's where you can change the settings. So when you click on that little wheel to take you to settings, this box will pop up. It has 3 tabs. The first is general settings. Here is where you can decide if students can respond once to a quiz or more than once. You can also allow students to change answers or edit their responses after they submit it. In the second tab, presentation, you can shuffle or change the order of questions, which is a way to prevent students from sharing their answers. And you can also write a little message that they will see when they submit the assignments, like good luck or have a great day. Okay. So here's the third tab, quizzes. When a Google form is turned into a quiz, you will be able to assign point values to each question and also indicate the correct answer for certain question types, like multiple choice questions. Another important setting found here is when and how you will release grades. You can choose to have the grades released immediately after each submission or later. You might choose to release them later after all students have taken the assessment, or if there are questions such as short answer or text that you have to grade manually. You can also determine what information about the assessment students can see, such as which questions they missed, the correct answers, or the point value of each question. As always, the settings you decide on will depend on the purpose or type of quiz you are doing. So here's an example of a short answer question on a quiz or Google form. You can see I added an image. So in this case, it's a weekly chart or calendar for students to respond to or to write sentences about. So you can see here, I asked students to write 5 sentences about this chart using adverbs of frequency and the simple present. And I gave them a little example. So you can also add other types of resources like videos or images for students to respond to in Google Forms. So this was a question I had to grade manually. And so you can see that the number of points up here, 4 out of 5, that this student earned for this response. And you can also see the individual feedback where I explained to students how or why I assigned each type of point value that I did. So when I do online quizzes or exams, I like to have a mixture of question types, so multiple choice, checkbox, short answer, short text, because each question types helps me to assess different levels or types of learning. So here's an example of the data analysis that Google Forms gives you. So you can see here the average score, and here the range of scores. And then we have a nice little bar graph where the score of each individual student is displayed. Below, you can also see here frequently missed questions. And so this is it actually gives you the text of the questions that students got wrong, as well as how many students got each of those questions wrong. So this will help you to quickly see what content was difficult for students or what questions you might want to edit before you use this quiz again. Okay. So here we can see a little bit more detail of that same screen. So we can see the list of students using their email, and then we have their score. And then we can see if and when the scores were released to students. So if you choose to manually release scores, or release them afterwards, you need to click on this blue button that says release scores. And then you can choose to release the scores to one student or to all of your students. One last recommendation when using this type of assignment, or in general, when you're doing something new in your online class, is try it out, and then try it out again. If your learning management system has a setting to change to a student's view, make sure you use that so that you can see what your students are seeing. If that isn't available, create another account so that you can log onto your online class as a learner. Make sure you take a quiz yourself before assigning it to students, as this will give you a chance to see how it looks on the screen and to check that your settings are the way you want them to be. You can also work with other teachers at your school to check and try out each other's online activities. So again, try it out and then try it out again. Once you've gotten a bit more comfortable with using different assignment types, you can relax and be a bit more confident. So let's take a quick break here. What is one way you can use quizzes with your students? So another common online assignment is to have students upload a document, such as a short text, a video, an image, or a presentation. Here, I would encourage you to be creative and to allow your students to be creative. Sometimes our main learning objective is for students to write a letter or an essay, but other times we can be flexible with the format or the medium students use to express themselves. For example, instead of requiring them to write a summary of a story they read, they can record a short video. Another example is instead of them individually researching and presenting on a topic, they can use Google Slides to collaborate on a presentation or on a digital word wall or a class dictionary. If you're wondering how students can collaborate using Google Slides or Google Docs, be sure to turn in on Thursday because one of my colleagues will be talking about just that. Okay. So here is an example of an assignment I recently gave my students using Google Classroom. So here you can see the instructions, which ask students to pretend they are a tour guide in Querétaro and present a piece of art or a monument. So they're asked to record themselves and to submit the recording. So in this class, which is a general English class at the A2 level, we've been working on the simple present, present continuous, and time expression. And we've also been talking a little bit about our opinions on art. So below here, you can see a little simple checklist, and that tells students what to include in their assignment. This is also the same checklist I will use to grade that assignment. So here is an example of one student's assignment. So this student included his notes, an image of the monument, in this case, the Convento de la Cruz here in Querétaro, that he was presenting. And then you can see here on the right that he also uploaded his recording. This little red thing here indicates that it's a recording or an M4A file. So when I grade this assignment, I will put the grade here, the number here, and then any comments I have, I will put it here where it says private comments. So I might make a comment on the overall, something that I liked or something that to suggest that only he can see.
Heather, we have a good comment I'd like to share in response to your question about how you can use the quiz feature. Of course, we had a number of comments about quiz types of vocabulary, reading comprehension, and so on. But Carmen suggests that we could also use the quiz form to do get to know you with new students at the beginning of a semester or year and make
exactly
related to getting to know students. Not something you're probably going to grade, but still a really good use of the form.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't want to get into that today because that's what we're going to get into a little bit more next time. But using Google Forms, you can use it as a survey, you know, as like a needs assessment. I've used it to get to know my students at the beginning of a period or semester. Do they like to work in groups? Do they like to work individually? That type of thing. So it doesn't have to be something that's graded or evaluated. It can definitely be something just to gather some good information from students, just like we did in the first session, right? Okay, so my last topic for today is flipped learning. So specifically, I'm going to talk about how you can use a learning management system to incorporate flipped learning into your class. So let's start with a basic definition of flipped learning. So flipped learning is a pedagogical approach in which direct instruction, so you in front of the classroom, moves from the group learning space, and then the resulting group learning space is transformed into a dynamic interactive learning environment where the educator guides students as they apply concepts and engage creatively in the subject matter. So kind of sounds a little bit, what is that going on? So basically this is where instead of you being kind of the sage on the stage, if you will, you're more the guide on the side. So just to give you a little bit of background on this type of learning, so one of the first experiments with flipped learning was in university science classes in the United States. And so a professor there realized that instead of giving the same lecture for 50 or 100 students, he could have them watch the lecture for homework or do a reading on the topic. And then in class, students could engage in discussions about the topics. So if we think about that in the context of what we do in teaching English, we can use flipped learning to make our classes more student-centered. So instead of using class time to explain a verb tense, you can record yourself doing the explanation, or you can create another digital resource that helps students explore and learn about a grammar structure, vocabulary, or another topic. And then you can focus class time on synchronous learning time, or your synchronous learning time on having students use the language in a more productive way. So giving more time to the students using the language and less time on us being in front of the classroom.
Heather, you got lots and lots and lots of heart emojis for that. I think people like flipped learning.
Yeah. So just to go in a little bit more detail to kind of help you think about or imagine how you might use it or do it in your classroom, especially with the online context. So here's one basic sequence for flipped learning. So before the class or the synchronous session with students, students study and prepare for class. So in your learning management system, you would give students access to resources such as videos, text, podcasts, or just direct them to parts of their own course book, or maybe give them some websites. So it's important in this step that students have a specific task to complete. So for example, if you have students watch a video on the present perfect, you need to give them a set of questions or a short exercise to complete. If you do not give them a specific task, students will not know what to focus on, and they won't really pay attention to what you want them to know before class. I would suggest that you could have students complete the task and turn it in through your learning management system before class. So this will help to ensure that students are actually prepared for class. Then during class,
Sorry, maybe this is not the right moment to ask this question, but I'll give it to you and you choose the moment.
Okay.
Is flipped learning a good option for young learners, so say 4- and 5-year-olds, or would you like to put that question off until the session which focuses on young learners?
I think we will address it in more detail there, but I guess I would say one thing is that flipped learning requires students to be somewhat autonomous. So we will talk about autonomy and students being in charge of their learning in more detail in more sessions, but students need to be somewhat capable of sitting down and guiding their own learning. And that's a little bit more difficult with younger learners. And so anytime you would do this with younger learners, you would need to get the parents involved for that help, to kind of sit them down and help them focus. So once students have done the part of the flipped learning cycle where they're at home or out of class, watching the video or reading the text, then during class, you can focus on having students work through tasks. So this is to see what gaps they have in their knowledge of the topic. And it also, it gives students an opportunity to use the language, such as in speaking and writing activities. The important thing here is that you, the teacher, are there to guide them as they work through and apply their knowledge. And then after class, if you would like, you can have students complete an online assessment, such as a short quiz or turn in a written assignment via your learning management system. So let's take an example, look at an example of an actual assignment. So for this class, which is a class for people training to become English teachers, just like you guys, students had to read material on a topic. So in this case, it was on different methods and approaches in English language teaching. So I divided the students into two groups, and each group read or learned about a part of the topic. So students from group A and their group members, they read about one topic, and then students from group B read about another topic. And then before class, they had to prepare a short presentation. So I think I told them 3 or 4 slides, and they had to summarize the main points of what they read about. And then in class, they used their presentation to explain their topic to the other group. And finally, the whole class took part in a discussion about the topic. So this is kind of the sequence of before and then during the class. So I know we have had a lot of comments on this particular topic, but if you haven't chimed in yet, so how do you think flipped learning would work in your context? So what are some obstacles or things you might have to work around to make it work? Okay. So finally, here are a few helpful resources. So the first is Rubistar. So this will help you to create rubrics for different types of assignment. The really great thing about Rubistar is that it already has templates or examples of different language or criteria that you can put in your rubric. So if you're sitting there thinking, oh, how do I even get started with a rubric? Rubistar is a really good tool to help you do that. Next is Shake Up Learning, and this is the site mostly focused on Google Apps like Google Classroom, but it has some really cool ideas for how to use these different apps. So how to use Google Slides to make a class dictionary, for example. And then finally, Google for Education's Teacher Center. So this is directly from Google. It has some wonderful training and support for teachers that are just getting started with Classroom. And it also has some preparation for being a Google educator, which is something you can, put on your CV, put a badge on your Facebook profile, or however you present yourself to the world. But it's a good place to get started and to connect with other educators who are also using Google Classroom. So Ruth, that's all for me. I'm going to hand it over to you if you have any questions, or if we can go ahead and go to the next slide.
Thank you so much, Heather, for this terrific session on using learning management systems more effectively. I'm sure that we all feel much more comfortable now with this type of platform than we did an hour ago. We are ready to move then to talking about sharing this information. And of course, in our pandemic, the easiest way to share this information with colleagues and friends who might be interested is through social media. And a watch party is an ideal tool for that. So one way the watch party is available to you on Facebook. So simply start a post. When the post box pops up, click on the 3 dots at the bottom right, and that will give you options. You should select the watch party option, and then you choose this video, which will be available on the Relo Facebook page, and publish it. At that time, your friends will get a notification to watch the recording with you. And while you're watching, you can do what you think would be great for expanding on your understanding and ability to use this by commenting, pausing for reflection, and so on. All right. So next session. Heather actually is in the know on what our next session will be, even though she is not our presenter next time, but she's been talking with our presenter, Wendy, and is able to tell us what we'll be learning about. So Heather, back to you.
Thank you. So in our next session, which is smartphones and self-access materials. So for most of the session, Wendy will be your lead presenter, and she's going to talk about how teachers in Mexico are using smartphones, particularly WhatsApp, to communicate with students and their families, and also how to make students a little bit more autonomous and in charge of their own learning through having them use self-access materials. So I'll be helping out with that a little bit, and we'll be looking at the apps Quizlet and Kahoot and how you might use them for asynchronous learning.
Thank you, Heather. We look forward to seeing you, Wendy, next time. That is on Thursday, June 4th. So for today, we want to thank you, our audience, for joining us. Again, great to see so many people from around the world, and good questions, good comments. Thanks. We look forward to seeing you then on Thursday for our next session. Until then, please stay home and stay safe.